Well, to be honest with you, I mean, the most scathing criticism of this free SHS program has come from somebody that I respect a lot, who himself is an academic, who himself is involved in education, and who himself is a lawyer of huge repute. And that is Professor Akilagba. And I'm sure that both of you have seen his comments on the free SHS program. Indeed, Professor Akilagba has said that the conception of the program and its implementation is, to quote his words, unintelligent. That's what Professor Akilagba says, unintelligent. Now he says that he's a Marxist and therefore has a certain commitment to compulsory free basic education. He has that commitment, But that in implementing it, you've got to find out, how that would impact on all sectors of the national life. You don't just put money in free SHS and so on. You need to determine, ab initio, the impact of policy on other areas of the national life and so on. And then he raised a question which is most important, Randy. He says, look, me, being Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, I'm a lawyer and so on. I can afford to pay the school fees of my children. How does it feel if you exempt people like me from paying school fees when in the rural areas, in the remote corners of this country, there are children who have no access to electricity, who are schooling under trees, who can't even have decks and so on, to write on. Okay. Now, the second person who has spoken so very eloquently, I don't normally admire him all the time, but on this issue, I think he's been quite eloquent, is Professor Adai. And his comments have been stated by Randy, so I need not repeat them. He's also spoken.
So Randy, I mean, so I feel that sometimes when it comes to this kind of discussions, we should sort of eschew intellectual arrogance. There are people who are the Ministry of Education, who are GES, who are part of the whole educational setup, who are also today implementing these policies, right? And so sometimes to hear things like unintelligent and all of those things, for me, should not be the way to have a discourse of this nature in terms of a national, of these national proportions. You can disagree, like any policy, you can always have disagreement. You can even be disagreeing based on a certain ideological standpoint.
What's your problem with?
I have a problem with that because, you see, if you're not careful, you would go back into these conversations and then you would actually trivialize this conversation. At the moment, as we speak, we have a system where, let's assume that a child goes into JSS at 10, 11, 12. By the time they finish JSS, they're like 14 years old or something like that. You leave JSS with what? A JSS certificate. And at 14, you don't even qualify to even gain any meaningful employment. In today's day, you can't do anything with a JSS certificate, apart from being able to use it as a placement, a means to placement to go to an SHS. And so, at the time that this thing was being implemented and our kids were truncating JSS at 13, 14, and 15, was that an intelligent policy? You see, so sometimes...
What are you responding to?
I'm responding to the various...
But you're wrong.
No, I'm not wrong. I'm just...
let me tell you why you're wrong.
I'm not mentioning anybody's...
No, but let me tell you why you're wrong.
When it comes to policy implementation...
No, just hold on. Let me tell you why you're wrong. Kwesi referred to Professor Akilagba.
But I haven't referred to him.
No, hold on. Yeah. We can't pretend.
Kwesi
referred to Professor Akilagba and referred to what Professor Akilagba referred to as unintelligent. And he was specific that when it comes to the implementation of the free SHS, there are people who can pay. What he said was that if you don't do a mean testing, you don't engage in mean testing, and you do this wholesale general thing, it is unintelligent. That's what he said.
Okay.
He didn't talk about an issue of policy to change this or change that.
No, but
he was clear.
Randy, I have sat here on several occasions and said that people who have called for means testing are actually, they are well within their right to do so, because it happens in other jurisdictions. Even the media plus finance minister, yes, who was actually a key component.
He said it didn't make sense.
Yes,
it was senseless
in terms of the management of this process. Also preferred.
He said it was senseless. If he can afford to pay for 5 people, why should it be free?
A divergent view, right? A lot of arguments have been pushed and presented in terms of why it makes sense. You see, in all of these conversations, it's also about the people who are impacted a lot more. You know, you have people who were truncating their education at a point where they just couldn't even fathom an idea of going to secondary school. Because once you leave JSS, or even in times past, it used to be called a middle school leaving certificate or common entrance, the first thing that the family will say that go and learn a trade or go and find something else to do, because they do not have any means to do so. Then you have families that can actually afford to pay, but all that is left is absolutely nothing, because they have absolutely nothing left. They are actually using all their resources and whatever to pay for their kids to go to school. And so for me, I think that, yes, we can come back and have these conversations about means testing and all of those. I don't have a problem with that.
The Honorable Deputy Minister of Education.
Yeah. Which one?
Reverend Ntim Fordjour. He has sent a text.
Yeah.
I want to read it.
Read it.
Okay. In fact, he intends for me to read it. So I'm reading it. It says, good morning. If dismantling barriers to access to quality education for the child of the poor is considered unintelligent by members of the elite who are able to afford the most expensive education for their wards, if doubling enrollment in TVET / SHS from 800,000 to 1.45 million students is considered unintelligent, then I wonder what intelligent policy looks like. I'm presently in my remote village, Asin Kruwa, where I visited some of the 3,200 BECE candidates preparing for their BECE next week, and reflected upon the several thousands of such students who, during my time at Asin Kruwa DA JHS some 3 decades ago, abandoned their brilliant dreams at JHS because there was no financial means to enter SHS / TVET. I was the only person from my village that year who could narrowly escape the fangs of poverty to enter Asin Manso SHS. Never again must we go back to the era where millions of brilliant young people were denied the chance to form part of the critical mass of the population empowered through education for meaningful national development. Good morning to my intelligent uncle, Mr. Pratt, and my intelligent friends, Dr. Randy and Eric Chum. God's blessings, Reverend Ntim Fordjour, Deputy Minister for Education from Asin Kruwa.
I think this is a most unfortunate text, exceedingly unfortunate text. And the arrogance of this text is baffling. You know, when it comes to education and the educational rights of the people of Ghana, Reverend Ntim Fordjour has the audacity to compare himself to Professor Akilagba, who for more than 60 years has been in the forefront of advocacy for educational rights, who became the youngest Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, and whose record at the university perhaps is unparalleled, and so on. Now you are talking about education, and you are running down comments of people like Akilagba and so on.
But, I hope you are not suggesting that Professor Akilagba cannot get it wrong.
You can get it wrong.
Yes.
No, everybody can get it wrong. But you see, in evaluating his comments, you ought to look at his background. It's important.
No, for me, I think we're even missing the point.
Please allow me.
Yes.
And he hasn't said any of the things which is attributed to him by Reverend Ntim Fordjour, Deputy Minister of Education. He is not opposed to free education. He endorses free education. But he's saying that it does not make sense to give free education to the most worthy and affluent in our society, where the poorest are denied free education. That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, why is taxation even progressive?
Exactly.